My parents told me that this year on Thanksgiving my kids aren't welcome at the dinner table. You ever get one of those phone calls that feels like a gut punch? Yeah, that's how my Thanksgiving kicked off this year. A few days before the holiday, my mom called. That alone was weird. She usually just texts something vague like, "See you Thursday." But this time, she sounded excited. Said there was a small change to the dinner plans. Only adults this year, she told me, like she was announcing a genius idea. No kids allowed. I blinked. Was this a joke? Lauren sat across from me at the kitchen table, helping Ethan color in a dinosaur book while Lily pranced around in her princess dress. No kids? At Thanksgiving? I asked if something was wrong. Maybe they were hosting in a smaller space. Maybe someone was sick. But no, everything was fine. They just thought an adult gathering would be more peaceful this year. Now, I should have seen it coming. My parents always found a way to treat me like the run-up in my own family. My brother, Ryan, golden boy, family favorite, walked on water in their eyes. Meanwhile, I had to practically set myself on fire to get noticed. Still, I wanted to believe it was fair, that it wasn't personal. I even told Lauren, at least they're treating everyone the same, and then I found out that wasn't true. The next day, my aunt called. She's the only relative who actually keeps me in the loop when my own parents conveniently forget to tell me things. She asked if we were bringing anything for the kids' table this year. What kids' table? Oh, you didn't hear? Ryan's bringing his boys. I swear, my stomach dropped to the floor. His boys, Ryan's two perfect little angels, were invited. Mine weren't. I felt like a fool. Of course it wasn't about an adult-only gathering. It was about my kids. My 6-year-old son and 4-year-old daughter weren't good enough. Not quiet enough. Not well-behaved enough. Who even knows? Maybe they didn't fit the perfect family aesthetic my parents liked to pretend they had. I was livid, but more than that, I was hurt. How do you look at your own grandkids and decide some of them deserve a seat at the table while others don't? Lauren tried to keep me from blowing up, but I could see she was just as upset. She knew how hard I'd worked to be a good dad, how much I'd tried to make up for the way my parents treated me growing up. And now, they were doing the same thing to my kids. So, I did something I never do. I called my mom back. I wasn't even angry at first. I just wanted to hear her say it. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe my aunt got the details mixed up. Maybe there was some logical explanation. But there wasn't. She hesitated for a second when I asked about Ryan's kids, like she was trying to find the right excuse. Then she sighed and said, "Well, they're a little older, and they know how to behave at the table." I almost laughed, like my 6-year-old was some kind of wild animal, like my daughter, who still asks if she can be excused before leaving the table, was some kind of problem. I asked her, point blank, "So what you're saying is, Ryan's kids are better than mine." Silence. A long, drawn-out pause that told me everything I needed to know. And then, finally, she spoke. I wouldn't put it that way, but yes, that was the moment everything changed. I sat there, staring at my phone, replaying my mom's words in my head. It felt like someone had yanked the rug out from under me. I had always known my parents played favorites, but this was something else. Lauren walked into the room, drying her hands on a dish towel. She took one look at me and knew something was wrong. That's the thing about being married. You don't have to say a word. They just know. She raised an eyebrow and asked what was up. I hesitated. How do you explain that your own parents don't think your kids are good enough for Thanksgiving dinner? I tried to brush it off, told her it was nothing, but she wasn't buying it. When I finally told her, she went still, just for a second. Then she let out this short laugh. The kind that isn't funny at all. She was furious. Not the yelling kind of mad, but the kind where you just know someone's about to start packing emotional TNT and setting up the detonator. Meanwhile, Ethan and Lily were in the living room, stacking couch cushions into some kind of wobbly fort, completely oblivious. They had no idea their own grandparents had decided they weren't worth a seat at the table. And honestly, that's what hit the hardest. These were great kids. Happy kind, and yeah, maybe a little wild sometimes, but show me a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old who aren't. Lauren sat down next to me, her fingers tapping against her knee. She said she wasn't surprised, but she was disappointed. She always knew my parents favored Ryan, but she never thought they'd go this far. That made two of us. For years, I bent over backward trying to please my parents. I showed up to everything, even when I didn't want to. I let them make little digs about my job, my house, my parenting, always shrugging it off like it didn't matter. But deep down, it did. I still wanted to be included. I still wanted to be part of the family. But this was different. They weren't just dismissing me anymore. They were dismissing my kids. And that was a line I wasn't about to let them cross. I looked over at Ethan, who had just collapsed his own fort and was now pretending to be a dinosaur, chasing Lily across the room. She was shrieking with laughter, totally unaware that her own grandparents didn't want her around for the holiday. And that's when it hit me. If my kids weren't good enough for them, then neither was I. I took a deep breath, looked at Lauren, and said it out loud. We weren't going. Not me, not her, and definitely not our kids. I wasn't going to beg for a spot at a table where my own children weren't welcome. Lauren didn't even hesitate. She nodded, grabbed her phone, and started looking up last-minute Thanksgiving plans. How do you feel about grilling steaks instead? She asked, smirking. Maybe watching the game with an actual beer instead of pretending to enjoy your dad's warm box wine. I laughed, and for the first time all day, I actually felt good about something. Thanksgiving was going to look a little different this year. And you know what? That sounded just fine to me. The moment I told my mom we weren't coming, I could feel the shift in her tone. She went from fake sweet to full-blown exasperation in 2 seconds flat. Said I was being dramatic, that I was blowing things out of proportion, that I was ruining a perfectly good family tradition over nothing. Nothing. That's what she called it. Like I had somehow misheard her very clear message about my kids not being welcome. I didn't argue. No point. I just told her we were doing our own thing this year, and hung up before she could launch into the usual guilt trip performance. Not even 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A text from my dad. Short, passive-aggressive, classic him. Didn't think you'd be this petty, but I guess I shouldn't be surprised. I stared at it for a minute, debated responding. Then I just locked my phone and tossed it on the counter. The man had spent my entire life making it clear that Ryan came first. I wasn't about to waste time explaining myself to someone who had never cared to listen in the first place. Then came Ryan's message. Heard you're making a big deal out of nothing again. It's just dinner, man. Relax. Just dinner. Sure, like it was just a joke every time he took a dig at me growing up. Like it was just how things are whenever our parents took his side. I could feel my pulse in my ears. It wasn't just dinner. It was years of this. Years of being treated like an afterthought. Years of trying to prove I mattered just as much as my brother, only to be reminded over and over that I didn't. Lauren must have seen the look on my face because she sat down next to me and put a hand on my knee. Breathe, she said. And I did. Because honestly, I wasn't even mad about the messages. Not really. I was mad at myself for ever thinking things would change. A minute later, I got another text, this time from my aunt. Proud of you, it said. They needed to hear that. I exhaled. Thanksgiving was in 2 days, and for the first time in a long time, I actually felt like I had something to be thankful for. Thanksgiving morning felt different this year. No frantic packing. No stuffing the kids into nice clothes they'd complain about. No bracing for awkward conversations over dry turkey. Just me, Lauren, Ethan, and Lily, making pancakes in pajamas and watching the parade on TV. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't dreading the day. We cooked together, let the kids mash potatoes even though half of it ended up on the floor. Ethan insisted on setting the table himself. carefully placing each fork like it was some kind of high-stakes puzzle. Lily made name cards out of construction paper, even though there were only 4 of us. It was messy, chaotic, and absolutely perfect. Lauren kept shooting me these little smirks throughout the day, like she knew exactly what was going through my head. And honestly, she probably did. Dinner was easy, no forced politeness, no tiptoeing around loaded conversations. Just us, eating way too much and letting the kids sneak extra pie. Afterward, we curled up on the couch, watching one of those animated holiday movies we'd seen 100 times, but still laughed at like it was the first. Then the calls started. I saw my mom's name pop up on my phone. I didn't answer. A few minutes later, my dad. Then again, and again. By the time I checked, there were 6 missed calls and a handful of texts. Lauren glanced at my phone and raised an eyebrow. I flipped it over and went back to the movie. Ignoring them felt weird at first, almost unnatural. For years, I had been the one who kept things running smoothly, who showed up when it was inconvenient, who fixed things when they broke, both literally and figuratively. If something needed doing, I was the guy. And now, I was done playing that role. The texts kept rolling in over the next few days. At first, they were casual. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving. Then they got more pointed. We missed you at dinner. It wasn't the same without you. Then came the requests. Can you stop by this weekend? Dad's TV is acting up again. We need help with the Christmas lights. Your brother's been so busy. Not one mention of my kids. Not one acknowledgement of why we weren't there in the first place. Then, finally, my mom sent the message I had been waiting for. We love you, but you're making a mistake. I let out a short laugh. A mistake? Right. Because choosing my family over their constant favoritism was somehow a reckless decision. And then Ryan called. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, another text. Dude, just talk to them. This is stupid. Maybe it was years of being the family's backup plan. Maybe it was exhaustion from always being the one to keep the peace. Either way, I finally picked up. Before he could say anything, I cut him off. My kids weren't good enough for Thanksgiving, but my money, my time, and my help still are. Silence. And for once, Ryan didn't have a comeback. I hung up before he could find one. A few weeks passed without a word from my parents. I figured they'd finally gotten the message, or at least found someone else to handle their never-ending list of urgent requests. Life was peaceful. Too peaceful. Then the call came. I was in the middle of making dinner when my phone buzzed. Mom's name popped up on the screen. I debated ignoring it like I had been, but something told me this wasn't the usual guilt trip routine. Against my better judgment, I picked up. The second I said hello, she was already in full-blown panic mode. Something about their credit card being declined, the account frozen, bills piling up. Everything was spiraling out of control. I blinked. None of it made sense. My parents weren't rich, but they were always comfortable. Or at least, that's what I thought. Then she dropped the bomb. Turns out, for years, they'd been using the extra money I sent them. Not just for emergencies like they claimed, but to cover payments on a credit card I didn't even know existed. And now, after maxing it out, they needed me to fix it. I gripped the phone, trying to process what I just heard. Not because they needed help, but because of the way they framed it. There was no shame, no real apology, just expectation. We did so much for you, Mom said. It's only fair that you help us now. Fair? Right. Because fairness had always been a big priority in our family. Lauren, standing by the counter, had stopped chopping vegetables. She shot me a look that said, I knew this was coming. She was right. I took a deep breath, kept my voice steady, and asked the obvious question, why weren't they asking Ryan, the golden child, the one they had always prioritized? Surely, he'd be more than happy to help. Silence. Then came the excuses. He had his own family to take care of. His job didn't pay as much as mine. He was too busy, right? And I wasn't? My kids didn't matter? My responsibilities didn't count? I let them rattle off their justifications before calmly telling them what they didn't want to hear. There wouldn't be any more money. No more covering their financial mess. No more swooping in to save the day. If Ryan was their golden boy, then he could be the one to bail them out. Mom gasped like I had just committed a crime. Dad muttered something about me being ungrateful. But I didn't care. For years, I had given. My time, my energy, my money. And for what? To be treated like an afterthought? To be good enough when they needed something but never when it actually mattered? Not anymore. I ended the call before they could argue. Then I turned to Lauren, exhaled, and shook my head. She smirked. Let me guess. Ryan suddenly isn't so golden when they need money. Exactly. For the first time in my life, I wasn't playing their game. And it felt damn good. I should have known they weren't done. After shutting down their guilt trip over the credit card mess, I figured they'd at least wait a few months before trying something new. But nope. A few days later, my phone lit up with another round of texts from my mom. It's just money, Michael. Are you really this cold-hearted? Ryan would never do this to us. If he made as much as you, he'd help, right? Because Ryan, the guy who conveniently disappears when things get tough, would totally be their financial savior if only he had the paycheck to match. Sure, I didn't bother responding. I'd already made myself clear. No more handouts. No more bailing them out. They could spin it however they wanted, but I wasn't playing along. A couple of days passed. Silence. It was almost peaceful. Then, just when I started to think maybe, just maybe, they'd finally given up, I got an email that nearly made me drop my coffee. It was from a lawyer. I read the subject line 3 times, convinced I was hallucinating. Then I opened it, and there it was, spelled out in legal jargon. My parents were demanding financial compensation. Not just any compensation. $100,000. 4 years of care, sacrifice, and support. I laughed so hard I nearly choked. They actually put a price tag on my childhood. I read through the whole thing, still half convinced this was some kind of elaborate prank. But no, they were serious. They wanted me to pay them back for raising me, feeding me, housing me, as if parenting wasn't, the bare minimum of having a child. Lauren walked into the kitchen just as I was shaking my head at my phone. She asked what was up, so I handed it to her. She read it, blinked, read it again. Then she let out a short laugh. Oh, wow. This is next-level desperation. Exactly. I scrolled down and saw they had actually itemized expenses, food, clothes, medical bills, even school supplies. Like I owed them for every pencil and peanut butter sandwich they ever gave me. I tossed my phone onto the counter. So, what do you think? Should I Venmo them the money, or do you think they'd prefer a prepaid gift card? Lauren snorted. I say we offer them a store credit. Maybe a nice discount on reality checks. I shook my head, still laughing. They had gone from guilting me, to manipulating me, to straight up invoicing me for existing. And the best part, they really thought I'd go for it. Like, of course I should be grateful for everything they did. Of course I should be willing to pay them back. What kind of monster wouldn't? I took a deep breath, exhaled, and pulled out my phone. This time, I actually responded. A single message. You want me to pay you for my own childhood? Good luck with that. I never thought I'd find myself standing on my parents' porch again, but there I was. It felt strange, like stepping onto an old battlefield where you already knew the outcome. Except this time, I wasn't the same guy who used to stand there, hoping for approval. I rang the doorbell. It took a minute, but eventually my mom opened the door. Her face dropped the second she saw me. No fake warmth, no forced smile, just pure, unfiltered shock. She stepped aside without a word, and I walked in. The house smelled the same, but it felt different. Smaller, colder, Or maybe that was just me finally seeing it for what it was. My dad was parked in his usual recliner, remote in hand, pretending this wasn't happening. Ryan, of course, was already there, leaning against the kitchen counter with that same smug expression he always wore when he thought he had the upper hand. Mom spoke first. "You finally came to your senses?" I let out a short laugh. "Oh, I came to my senses, all right. Just not the way you're hoping. I didn't sit. I didn't make myself comfortable. I just looked him straight in the eye and said it. You can go ahead and try to take me to court, but if you do, I'll go to the press. I'll tell everyone exactly what kind of parents you are. Every debt you dumped on me. Every time you used me like an ATM while treating me like a backup plan. I'll make sure your neighbors, your friends, hell, even your church group, know exactly who you are." Silence. Thick, heavy, and for the first time in my life, it felt like I had control. Dad clenched his jaw, gripping the armrest a little too tightly. Mom swallowed hard. Even Ryan's smirk faltered, just for a second. "Michael, don't be ridiculous," Mom finally said, her voice quieter now. I shook my head. "No, see, that's the thing. I'm done playing the role you wrote for me. You want to talk about fairness? Fine, let's talk about fairness. If you can put a price on raising me, I can put a price on the years I spent trying to earn a place in this family. And trust me, your number's way too low." Ryan pushed off the counter, stepping closer. "Come on, man. This is family. You don't just walk away." I smiled. "Watch me." And then I did. I turned, walked to the door, and left. I didn't slam it, didn't yell, just walked out, leaving them to sit in their own mess. Because I wasn't their safety net anymore. I wasn't their personal bank, and I sure as hell wasn't their son. The first snowfall of the season had just dusted the streets, covering everything in that perfect, postcard-worthy white. Christmas lights flickered up and down the neighborhood, casting warm glows through frosted windows. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and pine, and for the first time in years, Christmas actually felt like something to look forward to. Lauren and I had made a decision. This year, it would just be us and the kids. No forced smiles, no walking on eggshells, no pretending things were fine when they weren't. Just warmth, laughter, and a Christmas morning that actually belonged to us. Then came the knock at the door. I knew before I even opened it. I pulled the door open, and there they were, my parents, bundled up against the cold, standing on my porch like two people who had been planning this moment for weeks. Between them was a giant, gift-wrapped box, the kind of over-the-top spectacle designed to make a statement. They didn't say anything at first, just stood there, waiting for me to react. Mom looked hopeful. Dad looked stiff, uncomfortable, like maybe he knew how this was going to go but had agreed to it anyway. I glanced at the gift. A grand gesture, sure, but not the kind that actually meant anything. I didn't invite them in, didn't even reach for the box, just let the silence stretch. Then I spoke, my voice calm, even. "This isn't about Christmas. It's about control, about trying to rewrite what happened." Mom blinked, clearly not expecting that response. Dad shifted, exhaled sharply. They had rehearsed a conversation where I let them in, where things smoothed over with just the right words. This wasn't that conversation. "We wanted to make things right," Mom finally said, voice softer now, like she thought saying it gently would change something. I let out a breath, steady. "If you had valued my kids then, you wouldn't have to try now. But you didn't. And because of that, you don't get them now." More silence. The cold air curled between us, but it wasn't the kind that made you shiver. It was the kind that made things clear. I reached for the door, hesitating for only a second. "Merry Christmas," I said, not unkindly. Then I shut it, leaving them on the porch, their grand gift still in their hands. Inside, Lauren was setting out cookies for the kids. She glanced at me, eyebrow raised. "That go how you thought it would?" I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. Better, for the first time, Christmas actually felt like peace. The backyard was covered in a light dusting of snow, the kind that made everything look like it belonged in a Christmas card. The kids were bundled up, running around, their laughter ringing through the crisp winter air. Ethan was on a mission to build the biggest snowman ever, while Lily was content smashing little handfuls of snow together and declaring each one a baby snowball. I leaned against the doorframe, coffee in hand, just watching them. For the first time in years, there was nothing else pulling at me, no guilt, no obligation, no weight of expectation pressing down. Just this, my family, my home, my peace. Lauren walked up beside me, tucking herself under my arm, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there with me, taking it all in. Then, after a moment, she glanced up. Think they'll try again. She didn't have to say who. We both knew. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the warmth settle before answering. Did I think my parents would try to push their way back in? Probably. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about it. I smirked. Doesn't really matter. I already won. Lauren chuckled, shaking her head. You're impossible, and yet you married me anyway. She rolled her eyes but leaned her head against my shoulder. In the yard, Ethan let out a triumphant yell as he jammed a lopsided carrot into the face of his snowman. Lily clapped like he had just won an Olympic medal. I watched them, feeling something settle inside me, something solid, something real. Whatever came next, I wasn't afraid of it. My parents didn't own a single part of this life. They never had, because for the first time, I had everything I ever wanted. And the best part, I didn't owe it to anyone but myself. Just love, just family, just home. And that was more than enough.